and welcome to My Brain is a Wonderland Season 2. This is the podcast for neurodivergent women and the people who love them. You're here with your host, Emily, and today I am going to be talking about depression. I think it's something we all deal with, whether you have ADHD, autism, or not. For a lot of people, I forget the stats, but it comes up for most people in their lifetime that they become depressed. But I do think when you're dealing with something like ADHD or autism, it can come up a lot more frequently, and I'm going to talk about why I think that is. But real quick before I get to that, I just wanted to address stuff that was going on when I was making Season 1 of this podcast related to depression. I highly recommend you go back and listen to that season, especially the first 2 episodes that talk about how and why I was diagnosed. You'll notice if you've listened to those episodes that I cry relatively frequently. It usually comes up at the end of the episodes where I've been kind of building on talking about something where I'm emotional about it and then I start to cry or get a bit weepy at the end. You can hear it in my voice. And what was happening is I didn't realize that I'd gotten really overwhelmed when I was making that season and actually had become depressed. I had started that season initially not as a season. The whole idea was to do 1 episode a week indefinitely and keep this content coming. And of course I went full force into the whole thing and decided I was going to do 2 episodes a week almost immediately. And I edit my podcast. I take out the tongue clicks, the breathing, and the things that I just can't abide by because my sensory issues it drives me crazy. I add on the music at the beginning, I compress all of the audio and all that stuff. So I don't just record this and then throw it up online. And that's no criticism of people who do, that's just my method. So I have to actually go through and listen to the entire episode again after I've spent the time recording it and do the pauses, do all of the noise reduction, the compressing and everything as I go along, which can take almost double how long the episode is. So if I'm doing 2 episodes a week and the episode is 20 to 30 minutes, I mean, we're talking 2 more hours on top of recording to get this where I want it to be. And then I have to do all the uploading, creating all of the graphics for the podcast. And what ended up happening is I got so overwhelmed and I got burned out from doing that. I think I lasted about 8 weeks doing that, 2 episodes a week. And I realize now, looking back with the crying and the overwhelm, that I was actually really depressed at the time. And that's what led me to taking a 7-month break between that set of episodes and now what I'm calling Season 2, which started a few weeks ago. And I've gone back to doing just 1 episode a week, just trying to rein it in. I'm recording ahead of time, so what I'm recording right now, I probably recorded at least a month before today when you're hearing it having been released. And that's really just to help me stay on track and, again, not get overwhelmed and kind of get pushed into this experience of being depressed or this feeling where I just kind of end up down in the dumps and overwhelmed and can't deal with anything. And again, if you listen to the first episode where I talk about being diagnosed, that happened and led to my diagnosis. During COVID, I got very depressed and didn't realize it until later that I was depressed. And I don't know if this is common for other people, but I bet it is, because when you have ADHD or autism, you struggle to recognize other people's emotions and also recognize your own emotions and kind of label those emotions, right? And that happens with depression too. And what tends to happen with me is I can't stop it in the middle. I can't recognize it in the middle. I have to hit rock bottom and then reflect back after hitting rock bottom and having come out of it and say, oh, I was depressed then. And what I really want to work on is catching it in the middle. When I start to disconnect from work, when I start to disconnect from friends, when I stop doing my special interests, the things that bring me joy, when I start doom scrolling a bunch on my phone all day, I really want to try to put in place some recognition and measures in the middle so that when I recognize that in the middle, I can put these measures in place, these things I know I should do instead, to kind of mitigate that and stop it from really getting bad and me hitting the bottom of my depression. And someone who really gave me an insight on this, because I always thought I was just very depressed and that it would come and go, and I couldn't really see a pattern to my depression. It seemed to just come and go, and for a long time before I was diagnosed, I thought I might be bipolar, because I would have these cycles where I would feel like I was up, which just was me not depressed and a bit hyperactive from my ADHD, right? And then I'd be really down from my depression. And they say with bipolar, it can cycle, it can take weeks, months, where you're in these up and down phases. And so for a long time, I thought I might be bipolar. But a lot of other things didn't fit. It didn't quite fit when I would, WebMD this. And so I wasn't sure, but that's what I thought it might be. And I actually was watching this interview recently, and I wish they'd gone more into it, but I'm glad they said anything at all. It was with Trevor Noah, and if you don't know who that is, he is a South African comedian. He was very famous in Europe when I was growing up there as a teenager, and then he made the leap to the US, and he actually became the host of The Daily Show, which is the political kind of parody TV show on Comedy Central, I think, that Jon Stewart ended up leaving. And Trevor Noah took over. And I had no idea at all while he was doing this show that he has ADHD. And so I was watching a 60 Minutes interview with him recently where he was talking about a lot of different things. His upbringing in apartheid South Africa, and his, coming to America and becoming the host of The Daily Show. But then the host, the woman who was interviewing him, Leslie Stahl, actually brought up the fact that he has ADHD. I don't know if he's discussed this before and she already knew, or if they just discussed it off camera and he kind of said, this is what I want to talk about. But here's what happened, what they said in the interview, which I found absolutely fascinating. The interviewer, Leslie, said, some of the funniest people we know on the planet have depression. You come to mind. And she's talking about Trevor Noah. And here's what Trevor says in response. I've come to learn, thanks to some great therapists, my depression is created by a severe level of ADHD. And I think then the interview says something like, oh, so ADHD looks like depression, as a question. And Trevor says in response, for myself, it means that if I'm not careful in how I sleep, how I eat, how I manage my routine, I can become overwhelmed and it can just feel like the whole world is just too heavy to bear. And man, did that hit me right in the feels, right in the part of me that knows that is true for me too. What hearing that did for me is it made me realize why I have this cyclical experience with depression, that it comes and goes, and that I cannot identify why it comes and why it goes. And what I've realized is that when I get overwhelmed, which can be overwhelmed from taking on too much work. I'm in grad school right now, and I have a full-time job, and I'm doing this podcast, and we moved back before COVID to Florida to be around family, so we're seeing a lot of family. They're coming to our house to visit a lot and stay over. And when that becomes too much, like if I have too much stuff going on at one time, that can send me into a depression. If I'm not eating well, so if I start eating a lot of crap like fattening foods and sugar, and not eating a lot of fresh food that's healthy and keeps my digestion going, that can send me into a depression. If I'm not working out regularly, which for me regularly should be 3 to 5 times a week. 3 is like the minimum for me to maintain a good, healthy feeling in my mind. And also to keep some of my hyperactivity at bay, it also helps me to sleep. Because if I wear out my body a little bit, I can sleep. If I don't sleep well, so if I start staying up at night, not getting enough sleep, sleeping in really late, just having a bad pattern with sleep, that can send me into a depression. And I think it's usually a combination of all those things that send me into this depression. Then what tends to happen is I'm depressed for weeks, months, and it gets worse and worse and worse until I hit the bottom. Until, let's say, my marriage isn't going well, I'm not talking to family, I'm not investing in anything I enjoy, so I've lost all my joy. I might be removed from work, not doing well at work, and then something has to give. So maybe someone at work says, like a manager, you're not doing well, I get critiqued at work or something, or my husband is upset because I'm not talking to him, I'm withdrawn, things like that. And then I hit rock bottom, and then what tends to happen is I kind of pull back on everything, reset, and am able to kind of come out of it. But it can take a really long time to get there. That's why I was saying I really want to try to work on catching this in the middle and kind of mitigating it. I think this was a really good step in realizing what causes the depression. This cyclical depression is all of this overwhelm. And I've actually done really well in my life the last couple of years in creating a life that is not overwhelming. I have a job that has a really great work-life balance. I'm trying to do a lot more of my hobbies and the things that I love. Trying to maintain working out regularly, which is not going great right now, but I'll get back on that. And that is something that I really need to do, because these depressive periods are not fun, and they come on a semi-regular basis and derail me like they did with the podcast. The podcast was something I really wanted to do, and it just completely derailed me, and I couldn't do it for months. And it took me these 7 months to realize what happened, get back into a groove, and then after being in a groove and being okay, deciding that I was going to do this podcast again. And this is something that happened recently, that I decided to start the podcast again. I'd wanted to come back to it, but it just felt like it was too much. Now I'm ready to do it again and have put in place some of these ideas and strategies to help me deal with this stuff. Let's talk about things that have helped me. I'll get into a little bit more detail. I was just talking about a few different things. I'm not medicated, and I'm not saying that's helpful for me. That's just a choice. And you can go back to medication hesitation, the episode in this season that talks about why I've chosen not to be medicated, and I was medicated in the past. And it's something I'm comfortable with now, and I may choose in the future to try out some other medications, but right now I'm not medicated, so I'm not going to be talking about that as something for me that I've been using. But if that works for you, or you want to try, please do, and go back, like I said, and listen to Medication Hesitation, just to get a broad perspective on why I have currently chosen not to. Other than that, I have been working out a lot more. So really, I'm going to be honest with you, for my hyperactive ADHD, I really need to work out twice a day, 5 days a week, minimum. I mean 6 days a week with a rest day, if I can. And by that, I mean like 20 to 40 minutes in the morning on an elliptical, on the treadmill. I like a good P90X. That's a workout that you have to pay for it usually, but you can get it online for free if you just Google it. And I actually love workout videos because it helps with body doubling. A lot of people with ADHD like to have someone in the room when they're doing stuff just to help them get motivated to do stuff. And so for me with working out, I'm either on the elliptical or the treadmill watching one of my favorite TV shows on my phone that keeps me engaged, or I'm doing P90X, where I feel like I'm in the room with other people because there's a guy telling you what to do, talking, and he's with a bunch of people in the room with him. They're all talking, and so that really helps me. But really, twice a day, 5 to 6 days a week is what is best for me. It can be hard to maintain. Probably the longest I've ever been able to maintain that is about 3 months, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. But if I fall off of that routine at all, getting back on that routine is a nightmare. It's really difficult to go back to it. But if you are trying to mitigate some of your hyperactive tendencies, maybe like binge eating, over talking, not being able to sleep, fidgeting, I really recommend working out. And just start slow, 10 minutes a day, and you'll build up your heart rate and your lung capacity if you do that every day, and then you'll do 20 minutes, and then you'll be able to do 40 minutes. And if you can't fit it into your day, aim for 10 to 15 or 20 minutes. If you've got kids, family, lots of commitments, a big job, that's what I recommend. And it helps with keeping your body fresh and kind of gives you a bit of an upper, to be honest. It can be difficult to get depressed when your heart is beating so rapidly from working out, and you get all this stress, and good for anger and all those things. So I super recommend that. The other thing is eating a really well-balanced meal. And that doesn't mean to say not enjoying yourself, not eating carbs, not eating cookies, whatever, that's fine on a even regular basis. I don't know what you mean by regular, but you probably shouldn't eat cookies every day. The sugar spike probably isn't good, especially for my hyperactive ADHD. Sugar can send me through the roof in terms of talking. But if I'm eating a good, well-balanced meal, so there's protein in there, and that can be beans, if you're vegetarian or vegan, and you've got a bit of carbs in there so you don't get hungry, and you've got some veggies. I love fresh veggies, man. I just love fresh veggies. Fresh fruit as well, that can give you a bit of a sugar spike, so you might need to be careful with that. And then don't limit yourself. I was telling my husband last night, I love food and I love eating, and that's just how I'm always going to be. And I need my food to taste like something I enjoy. So if you like cheese, that's a good source of protein. Eat some mac and cheese, but maybe put some fresh veggies on the side so you've got that nice rounded out meal, or have some fruit at the end. Something I do is mix spinach into my mac and cheese sometimes, onions. It's kind of a filler that adds flavor. The spinach especially, you can't even taste it. It's a filler, and it's good for you. Another thing I super recommend is to lean into your special interests. I find that sometimes there's a little bit of discouragement about special interests, especially from the neurotypical community, that you're so, that you're obsessed, that you're over-focused. But these are the things that bring me joy. These are the things that I love to learn about and experience. And whatever brings you joy, there's nothing wrong with leaning into that, right? If it distracts you from looking after your kids, things like that, you might need to rein in it a little bit. But some of my special interests are going to the theater, watching movies. God, Barbenheimer is coming out. That's Barbie and Oppenheimer. They're pushing for the double feature, or it just came out because I'm recording this before it came out. This will be released after, but they're pushing the double feature. I would kill to go see Oppenheimer and Barbie in the same day. I love that. Going to the theater, painting, drawing, reading my favorite books. I love nonfiction. Espionage is one of my hot special interests that I love to read about, and I love to watch movies about it, and love to watch TV shows. And so when I lean into these things, only joy comes from that. It's only joy. It's awesome to be able to learn so much about something and retain all this information. I'm a little bit of an encyclopedia sometimes. And doing art is just a good feeling in and of itself, intrinsically. I don't need to produce anything from it. It used to be that I felt like I wanted to be an artist and get paid, and I was just like, this is too much pressure, it's too overwhelming. So now I do all of my art for myself and my family, and the experience of doing it. So if you have special interests, lean into those. And if you find yourself leaning away from your special interests, or you can't drag yourself to go do what you've always loved to do, try to recognize that, because that could mean that you're getting ready or heading into a depression. And that's something I've got to recognize more, that when I pull back from my special interests, that, oh, okay, I might be dealing with something here. And then the last thing I would say is sometimes you just need to pull back from all the pressures. If you are someone who I have been and sometimes are still, who puts in 125% at work, right? Maybe if you're overwhelmed and heading into a depression, start putting in 90%. A lot of people aren't going to notice. If you're doing 125%, most people don't notice that at your job. And if they do, that's great, but oftentimes you don't have to do that. You see the people at work who kind of coast by. You don't need to be a coaster, but there's a lot of people who have jobs for years who aren't putting in every shred of their energy, time, and dignity into their job. So if you are doing that and getting overwhelmed, maybe pull back on that a little bit. If you need help at home, if you have the money for it, hire a cleaner for your house. There's no shame in that. If you need help from family, ask for someone to come stay with you or visit if you don't want the pressure, mother-in-law in the house or whatever. My mother-in-law's awesome, so I don't have that issue, but she just visited, and it was great to have her down and take some of the edge off. She'd take us out to dinner so we didn't have to cook. She was someone else to talk to about your emotions. Asking for help, that's another great thing to do. And just in general, saying maybe to friends, pulling back on everything. Saying to friends, I can't hang out right now. I need to just pull back on all the things and take some time for myself. And if they're your friend, they'll understand that, especially if you communicate it. Dropping people and ghosting people, which I've done plenty of in the past, will get people upset. So that's just some advice from me, is just be communicative and honest. I'm dealing with stuff right now. I need to pull back. And those are really my top recommendations for realizing when you're in a depression, preventing when you're in a depression, mitigating when you're in a depression, and what to do when you realize you've just fallen off the edge, which, like I said, happens to me a lot. And I just want to say real quick as well, there's no shame in being depressed. I feel like in the millennial generation and above especially, which is what I am, I'm a millennial, I'm in my 30s, I have experienced a lot of shame around depression, that if you talk about it, it's seen as, oh God, you can't handle this, we don't want to hear this, get it together, pull up your bootstraps, deal with it, blah, blah, blah. But the newer generations, Gen Z, who's below Gen Z, I forget now the name of it, but it's a lot different, the new generations coming up. There's an acceptance and an openness about recognizing that we're all dealing with a lot of crap, and that as long as you're communicative about it, there's an acceptance there. So try not to feel ashamed of it. I felt a lot of shame in the past. Feel free to be open with people if you feel safe to do so. Not everyone is in a position with family, friends, and work where you can feel safe to communicate that you're depressed, or you get depressed, or you might be getting depressed. So be vigilant with regards to who you tell, and if you know your job and your family, you know who you can talk to. If you don't have someone to talk to and you feel like it's not safe to tell anyone in your life, I recommend finding a good therapist, because we all need someone to talk to who just accepts what we're going through and is there to help us deal with it. So if you're struggling with finding a safe space, look for a good therapist. Look for a good community that maybe is used to dealing with mental health. That can be, you could volunteer, with places like homeless shelters. They know about depression. If you are comfortable going to a church, that's not my vibe, but it might be your vibe. Try to find that space where you can talk to someone, because depression in the dark and in silence is the worst place for it to be. It only gets worse during those times when it's hidden and veiled in shame. So if we can put it out there in the light, it kind of gets cleansed, right? I see depression as a bit of a vampire. You can kill it if you bathe it in the light. If you get it out there and it's kind of public and you have that safe space to share it and have help with it. That's my little Buffy reference there. That's what I have to say about depression. I hope that whether you are dealing with depression right now, have dealt with depression, feel it coming on, if you're in a good space and you know it might come on, I hope all of you have gotten something out of this episode where you're thinking, okay, maybe I could try that. Doesn't hurt to try, right? Doesn't hurt to try working out if you never have. Doesn't hurt to try leaning into your special interests when you're feeling crappy. Contact me if any of this stuff helped you. You can reach me in all the places. If you look at my show notes, you will see all of the social media and email address where you can reach out to me. Thank you for tuning in for My Brain is a Wonderland Season 2. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.